Good day everyone and welcome to my Magicka Sorcerer PvP guide for the Blackwood patch. As always I will be having builds for Cyrodiil, Dueling and Battlegrounds, which you will also be able to find on the website. If you're not looking specifically for builds but more help with your gameplay and what kind of rotations to run, I also have a guide on that, which is from the previous patch, but all those mechanics that I explained there still count in this patch. Both the link to the website and to that gameplay guide will be in the description of this video. But now about the builds. First of all, this patch, the main change that have happened to Magicka Sorcerer is in terms of sets. As you probably all know, in the previous patch it was a no proc Cyrodiil patch, so you couldn't use any proc sets, but now you can use all those things again. And there's also some new mythic items and such that are very important for MagSorc. I'll be going over everything in the build, so races, potions, mundus and sets, you name it. I'm going to start with the more general stuff now, such as the race. And the thing that I always use there is High Elf. However, Breton is equally good. I'd say that, like, if you really look at it mathematically, High Elf might have a slight benefit over Breton, but honestly it's barely even worth saying, so I definitely wouldn't bother changing. It's the same thing. Next to that is also Dark Elf, which is also a very good choice for that. Not the go-to choice, but a very close second best, I would say. Then for the food I'll be using in just about every build I will present, it is the Bewitched Sugar Skulls, which is simply the most stat-dense food, giving you both a high amount of health, magicka and stamina. However, there's also the Artesian Pickled Fishbowl worth mentioning, because in many situations, in many builds, you will have a high amount of maximum stamina. Especially if you're also a Dark Elf on top of that, and in that case it might be very much worth trying Artesian Pickled Fishbowl instead, getting some more magicka and health at the expense of maximum stamina, of which you were having an overkill in the beginning anyway. Personally, I always run with Sugar Skulls because the extra stam sustain in 1vx, it allows me to roll dodge a lot more. And that is something I find more beneficial than a little bit of extra health and magicka. For the potions in every build, I will be running the spell power potions. So, here. So with the major intellect and the major sorcery, having that crit buff is very important on just about like every build. If you're not using Markarth, I get it through the potions, and the same counts for the spell damage buff. The poisons on the back bar, as always, escapist poisons. These are made with Columbine, Wormwood and Namira's Rot, and give you 4.4 seconds of a root on the enemy, which is nice to have, because next to that you don't have any roots on Magicka Sorcerer. But more importantly, it gives you C immunity, which is really useful to have. Then something that I've a little bit underestimated at the start of this patch, to be honest, for myself specifically, but can definitely be worth it as well, is Vampire. On this character, my AD Sorc, I'm not a Vampire right now, but on my DC Sorc I am, and I'm still trying it. But Vampire is pretty strong this patch, because the nerf to healing regeneration is irrelevant right now, because they have half the value of health regen in PvP. I mean, Zenmax has done that, so it's already not worth much to begin with, and further reducing your health recovery with Vampire is barely even noticeable, especially on the MagSorc. So basically it is just a question versus whether you want to have the resistance from Vampire at the cost of the sustain, or whether you're not willing to give up that sustain. I'm not sure of that myself yet. As I said, I have my Vampire on one of my Sorcerer characters, and I don't have it on the other. It's a bit of a decision you will have to make for yourself here. In any case, Vampire is worth considering. Think about it. That in-depth passive is really strong. Then for the mundus, I will be switching between the Aeternach and the Mage mundus on most of my builds. If you want to have a damage mundus, I don't recommend it, but Lover would be the most amount of damage you can get out of a mundus. It is better, however, in my opinion, to go with the Mage, because that will also give you a little bit of more damage. However, it will increase your shield size by quite a bit as well. So that's it for the general things. Now about the builds themselves. Basically there is two ways to run a MagSorc in PvP. The first way is with Streak. and you use that streak both as mobility and as stun. And the other way is with Ball of Lightning. So you put a Ball of Lightning on the back bar and then something like Bound the Storm on the front bar. And then you use Destructive Clench as a CC. And in that way you don't have to use Streak as a CC. Now, what are the differences between the two? Personally, I will always run the Streak stun because it is a better stun and it's that mobility and stun like in the same skill, two functions that you can have when you cast one ability. That makes it really worth running Streak, but I know there's a lot of people that have problems aiming Streak, and if you can't aim Streak properly, or if you can't turn around your camera quickly after streaking through an enemy, it's not really worth using it, because it's very important that you can respond quickly with a fragment or something else after streaking through an enemy. I'm mainly looking at console players here as well, because I know they have a very low camera sensitivity, so after they streak through somebody, it takes them quite a time to turn around. It's not like Ball of Lightning doesn't have any benefits in itself though. First of all, the skill in itself, Ball of Lightning, is really good for damage mitigation and also for kiting. It's going to absorb a lot of projectiles, and when I will go over builds that have that, it also replaces some of the functionality of roll dodge. So that's a useful thing to have in terms of defense, and also that snare removal is very useful. It makes you fast, you can basically cannot be locked down easily at all. And then on the front bar with those Ball of Lightning builds, you'll often run the Master's Inferno Staff. That Master's Inferno Staff is a much worse CC. Well, Perfected Inferno Staff. That Master Perfected Inferno Staff is a much worse CC than Streak with Clench, but the damage buff that you get from it is quite nice on the other hand. So if an enemy does get hit by the CC, the fragment, for example, that you can cast after that is going to deal a lot of damage. So starting off for open world, the main build I will be using has that Streak, so not the Master's Perfected Inferno Staff or Ball of Lightning, it uses Streak, and this first build will be the one that is most similar to what I presented in the last patch. So it's going to be using 5 Crafty Elfique in combination with 2 Trainee, 3 Ancient Grace and a Mythic item, and either 1 piece Dummy House or 1 piece Swarmodder, whichever you have. So 5 light armor, 1 heavy, 1 medium. The traits for me are all well fitted. On the armor, the front bar is sharpened, the back bar is defending. And for starters, about this mythic item, I'm using one of the new ones they released in the Blackwood patch, Death Dealer's Feet. It is basically a 2.5k Magicka stamina and health that you get from this thing. I know it takes a minute to like get to its full strength to give you all those stacks. That minute for me passes in no time in actual combat. So I regard it as simply just a bit like a trainee but stronger, like double the value, because that 2.6k resources is what you get on the tooltip, but then you add in the modifiers and such and you get something that is closer to 3k of course. There are other mythics worth considering as well. First of all, there is Citis Gaze. This mythic is going to be a really good choice if you want to boost your defense a bit more. I am not going to be using this over Death Dealer's Feet. However, if you are having problems with dying too quickly, definitely take a look at this Gaze of Citis and try that instead of Death Dealer's Feet, maybe in combination with Vampire as well. And then you just place that on the helm and you place that 1 Crafty Elfique to the jewelry and you use like still 5 light armor, so you change that to light armor, the chest that is. And also about Citis, it's a bit similar to Death Dealer's Feet in the sense that it may seem like it has a drawback because it says reduces your block mitigation to 0, but for Magicka Sorcerer this is not the case, because as a Magicka Sorcerer, when you have a shield up and then you block, it doesn't reduce the damage taken on your shield anyway. It is only going to start reducing damage taken when your shield is down. So Gaze of Citis basically has no influence to blocking when you have a shield up, which should be most of the time on the Magicka Sorcerer, especially if you're taking a lot of damage and you plan to block. And you don't block much at all to begin with, so you can basically ignore that so-called drawback. So basically we are just getting then like 3k health, 4k armor and 1k health recovery, which becomes 500 in PvP. which is all defensive stats that will help you, survive in PvP in case that is a problem you're having. And then the last mythic that is worth mentioning is Talk of Tonal Constancy, which is basically going to be a sustain boost. So this might be especially relevant in no CP. Personally, I'm not using this over Deathdealer's Feat either, because while it is really nice sustain when you're on low resources, it does require you to juggle a bit with your resources. Get your stamina low to get then your Magicka up, stuff like that. So I prefer Deathdealer's Feat over that, because it's a really constant 2.6k resource that is always there, or well, almost 3k, while Talk of Tonal Constancy is already a little bit less reliable. Gaze of Cities, also nice, but I prefer the maximum Magicka that Deathdealer is gonna give, and on top of that, that health difference between Gaze of Cities and Deathdealer's Feat is something I don't care about. And then we are basically just having that 4k armor, which I'll be missing out by not running Gaze of Cities, which is a pity. It's about 5% damage reduction, that 4k armor, or well, a bit more than 5%, like 6, I think, or 7. Swat. In any case, you got like that 6% damage reduction from Cities, and on Death Deals you have a 2.5k Magicka and 2.5k stamina. I do find the latter better here. Then, of course, not everybody has these mythics. There's people who don't have Blackwood or who don't have the right DLCs for this, but there's no worries here because there is good monster sets to use on MagSorc as well. The first one I want to talk about is Cyrodiil. Now, Cyrodiil is a monster set that is very similar to Cities actually, in the sense that it will also make you a little bit tankier. If you run Cyrodiil on the on the helm and the shoulder, you'll drop your mythic because you gotta place a crafty elfic over here, but then you can also drop the bound the storm on the back bar because it's the same skill, and use bound armor instead. So what's gonna happen when you use Cyrodiil is that you get a little bit more resistances from that one piece, you get a little bit more health, and you get quite a bit more magic on the back bar, and also some more resistances on the back bar. In fact, almost the same value as Cities is going to give. It's 3k versus 4k armor. So it's very similar actually, Cities and Cyrodiil in use. I've compared the two and I find that Cities is a little bit better, but to be honest the difference isn't that big at all. And yeah, so Cyrodiil is definitely worth running as well. And then the other monster set I want to talk about is Engine Guardian, which is basically a sustain boost, just like Talk of Tonal Constancy is. That's a bit what it compares to. But I find that the Engine Guardian is a little bit more unreliable for sustain, but on the other hand does eat some damage. Like people often cast things like Meteors or Soul Assault at that little Engine Guardian when it pops up, that little sphere. So it does a little bit more defense as well in itself. Also worth running in case you don't have a mythic. So yeah, when it comes to all these mythic items and monster sets, my favorite is Death Dealer, and then you have like Cities and Talk of Tonal Constancy, and then you have Engine Guardian and Cyrodiil. Now it is a flexible build, however, so if you want to run both a monster set and a mythic, that is also possible, because if you drop the second piece of the trainee, which is going to give that Magicka, then you can place the crafty elfic piece on the ring, then you still have 5 crafty elfic, and then you can use a shoulder and a helm to use a monster set on top of a mythic item, which is also worth a try. But personally I find it better to simply have that 2-piece of the trainee and then that 1-piece monster set. It's quite a bit of stats like that. Now, one thing I didn't mention yet is, of course, like as I've said in previous patches, this is my roll sword build. I heavily built in to be able to roll dodge a lot in combat, which is going to give me an extra defense on top of my shields. And the way I do this is by running well fitted on my gear through these champion points as well. I will go over that in a bit, but also because I have 2 infused jewelry pieces with a tri-regen enchant on them. Now, the basic enchant like that is normal on MagSorc to use on jewelry is arcane, and there's nothing wrong with that. By all means, run arcane on there. I'm simply sacrificing a little bit of that maximum Magicka in order to get a much higher stam sustain, and in order to roll dodge a lot more in combat, which for my kind of gameplay, the 1vx, is really useful to have. Because that roll dodge is going to prevent the enemy from locking me down, and I can also keep on ignoring damage that they try to deal on me while trying to burst somebody down. Now then, for the champion points, I'll start with the blue tree here. So the slot builds are the most important ones. Here I will be using Deadly Aim, Duelist Rebuff, Resilience, and the last spot is a flex spot. So either use Arcane Supremacy here, the other alternative is Master at Arms, and the last option is Enduring Resolve. Now, the way you need to look at this is that basically Enduring Resolve is a champion point that's going to give you more tankiness. Master at Arms is going to give you a little bit more damage, and Arcane Supremacy is going to give you less of both. So it's a bit of a mix of both damage and a resistance increase, because you're going to make your shields bigger too. I think overall, to be honest, that Master at Arms is the best value here, because just like Deadly Aim, this is going to increase all the damage you deal as a sorcerer. So also things like Curse, that also gets buffed by Master at Arms, making it a flat 10% damage done to just about all your damage as a magsorc. And I think, to be honest, that this might be worth more than that 1.3k Magicka from Arcane Supremacy. But, I mean, you know how easy it is to get into that maximum Magicka stack as a magsorc, so I'm a bit on the fence on which of these two to use here so far. I just need to play more with either of those and see which one I'll like best. The increased tankiness and a little bit of damage, or a lot of increased damage. And then for the red CP, oh, by the way, one more thing, it's important to have resilience when you're running well fitted on your gear, otherwise crits are going to hit you way too hard. Then next up, the red CP. The slot spells here are Bastion, Juggernaut, Rejuvenation, and Arcane Alacrity. I don't really have much to say about this. These are, in my opinion, just the best CPs for magsorc. The Arcane Alacrity can be switched out for Survival Instincts, which is also a good CP to have. It's a similar roll dodge reduction, but then you get a bit of break-free cost reduction on top of that. But on the other hand, you do have to drop Mystic Tenacity to 10 points only, so you lose a bit of defense in that sense, and it's also not going to be up as reliable as Arcane Alacrity, except if you're dealing with high numbers, of course. If you're fighting a high amount of enemies, then you'll have stats effects on you basically permanently, but if it's only 1 or 2, you know, Survival Instincts won't be up all the time, while Arcane Alacrity, it's basically always there, because I almost always have a shield up. The green CP, yeah, it's not very relevant, of course, but basically it's for going down the Cyrodiil, Gifted Rider, Warmount, Rationer, and Steve's Blessing are my preferred CPs here. So that's it for that streak version of, I think I forgot to... Oh yeah, well, anyway, see, now I'll have Master at Arms instead of Arcane Supremacy. I'll see which one of the two I like the most. In any case, so that's it for that streak version in Cyrodiil of the Magicka Sorcerer build, and then the other way to run it is, as I mentioned, with Ball of Lightning and Clench. And the way to do that is by running a Inferno Staff, the Master's Perfected Inferno Staff on the front bar, then a 5-piece set on the back bar, for example Lich. Also good is Iron Blood, that works as well. Another example is Juggernaut, which is a little bit like Iron Blood in functionality, but it doesn't have that snare on top of it. It has a cooldown that's a bit longer instead. And then the last option, also worth considering, is Spell Power Cure, because if you run something like if you run in a bit of a small group, let's say 2 or 3 people, especially if they're all sorcs, and you use rapid regeneration or radiant regeneration, you can buff those other sorcs as well with Major Courage, which is a pretty significant spell damage increase and nice to have. But in any case, I'll just showcase it with Lich for now, or with Iron Blood for now. So you run that back bar set, which is Iron Blood, Master Inferno on the front bar, and then 5 Crafty Elfique again. In combination with 1 monster set and the mythic item. The mythic item is the same story as before. The monster set again is Domiha's or Swarmolder 1 piece. But for the trace now, where before I was using more well fitted, I'll be using more impenetrable here because I mentioned that, as I mentioned at the start, when you use Ball of Lightning, it replaces the functionality of Roll Dodge a little bit, because It is going to give you an increase in movability, and it is also going to be a significant damage reduction because it's going to absorb projectiles. And with roll dodge, you're going to dodge projectiles. So instead of roll dodging, I'll often cast a ball of lightning instead when I run that, which means that I don't need to build as much into roll dodge anymore. And then I'll switch from impenetrable to I'll switch from outfitted to impenetrable, and my jewelry will be arcane instead of infused as well. The death dealer here is just infused because it came from the previous build, which uses infused. But yeah, as I said, this build. Clench and Ball of Lightning, better for people that have difficulties for aiming streak and for people with lower camera sensitivity that can't turn around their camera after streaking through somebody. One more thing to say about this, in the stats you can maybe see that the maximum Magicka right now is very low. I just dropped Arcane Supremacy. I think I would recommend running that on these builds though, because otherwise it is just going to be too low on maximum Magicka. In the previous builds you will also always have like 47 to 50k, but here it goes a bit lower. With Lich, for example, we're at 43.6k, and then the, let's say, 2.8k or 3k from Death Dealer's Feet will be around 46.5k, something like that, which is a decent amount of Magicka to have. Especially if you run a sword on board in the black boss, so there are ways you can get a decent Magicka pool. But what I wanted to mention at the start is that the stats here, they have a lower maximum Magicka, but they have a higher health regeneration. And that is because I'm still running the 800 mundus. It's better on a build like this with Lich especially to run the mage mundus instead to get more maximum Magicka, because otherwise it's going to be way too much Magicka generation with this base Magicka recovery and then Lich on top of that. This amount of stats is better spent in getting more maximum Magicka. So this is where you swap to the mage mundus. Now you see I've switched to the sword board here, as I mentioned. This is something you can do for all the kind of builds I've mentioned so far. So whenever I'm using a resto staff on the back bar, you could as well be using a sword on board, and then instead of running healing ward or rapid regen, you run crit surge as healing. And this crit shield, this setup with sword on board is going to be a bit tankier than the resto setup, but the healing is going to be a little less reliable, because let's say a situation I find myself in pretty often is when I suddenly got at low health because like multiple people jumped on me or something like that, and then I need to kite it out. And if I'm not actively damaging something, then I am not receiving any healing from critical surge at all. At the moment that I do need it quite a lot, which is a situation I don't like. Yes, I can counter that a little bit with the heal from Dark Conversion, but you know, if people happen to be spamming Crushing Stroke at me at the same time, I could really find myself in quite a lot of trouble. Because I'm running critical surge. So that's a bit like the benefit and the drawback of running sword on board. Again, this is a bit of a decision you have to make for yourself, which one you like the most. It's tankier, but the healing is a little bit less reliable. The one exception where I would say it is better to run a resto staff is for sure is when you're running Iron Blood, because Iron Blood is going to make you very tanky when it procs, and then I like to work around with the resto ult, and that resto ult is going to, you know, basically make you invincible in combination with that Iron Blood, gives you time to kill somebody and then return back to the defense. So that's a bit of a nice dynamic I like to have in this particular build. Again, rapid regeneration or healing ward then as healing. One quick note about that: in no CP it is often better to run rapid regeneration, because there your shield size is reduced significantly because you lose some maximum Magicka, because you do not have the champion points. And then on top of that you don't have Bastion either, which is another like a bit of a double loss in shield size because you're playing in no CP. While you still have that high spell damage that stays the same, you know, after that 1k spell damage and weapon damage that they gave, I think it was last patch or 2 patches ago, that quite buffed the value of rapid regeneration, making it, I think, a bit better than healing ward in no CP. Then for duels, the next build here, I basically have a bit of a variation of the first build in this guide. So again, I have this 5 Alfiq with the 2 trainee and the Ancient Grace. With 3 Ancient Grace with the Death Dealers and the 1 piece of a mythic item. But instead of focusing on more all-round stats and such, for this dueling I will be focusing on stacking maximum Magicka. I think that's the best way to go with it now, except for going full PetSorc, of course. Maybe I should say a word about that first. PetSorc in PvP, its main use is in duels, because it's going to be a lot of passive damage, it's going to be a lot of damage reduction, because you can LOS behind your pets, and it is a pretty cheesy dueling setup. So, you know, going like that is definitely the best way to go for duels. But I'm not really into that kind of things with pets, I don't enjoy it much. I just always present non-PetSorc builds for dueling, because I simply don't like the full PetSorc playstyle. But in any case, the best way to do that without pets is by stacking maximum Magicka. In previous patches I would have said it's with proc sets and you have to use as many as you can and get a lot of passive damage that way. But the thing is, with the nerf to proc sets, their value is significantly reduced compared to the previous patch. I would use more of the Inferno right now. Its damage now, if you don't like build into a lot of spell damage, is absolutely abysmal, and I don't like using it in comparison to just running a maximum Magicka setup. So what I'm doing here, the adjustments I'm making to that build to make it so, is first of all I'm running a Swarmbot on the back bar. Remember what I said about crit surge? It's not really reliable healing in open world, but in duels I do find it to be reliable healing. And then another adjustment I've made is, this is a bit optional, is changing that second shield to dampen magic to bound ages, giving you more tankiness on the back bar and bigger shields. I find that one shield in duels is often enough, because you just cast that one big shield and then you go back on the offensive and enjoy the crit surge healing in the meantime. But double shields works perfectly fine as well. Then another adjustment to make here is, this is, you know, usually I run the sugar skills, but for dueling I will go with the arcane pickled fish bowl instead, which will further increase my maximum Magicka. It goes at the cost of stamina. It looks low right now with only 14.4k, but do remember that like it gets about 3k higher. It goes to almost 17k I think, or a bit above that, when the Death Deal feat stacks are all active, which is pretty soon. Like especially in a duel, it takes longer than a minute most of the time, if not all the time. So, you know, again, the stab maximum stamina will be fine, and I'm happy to make that sacrifice for more maximum Magicka and more health. One more change to make is that I prefer to run more impenetrable pieces, bumping up the critical resistance a little bit, instead of the usual full outfit that I have, because in duels I do not want to rely on roll dodge. I don't like the roll dodge spec for duels specifically, because there's a lot of enemies that will, you know, hit you right as you come out of the roll dodge, or have things that go through roll dodge quite easily, and you'll be quite countered against a lot of specs. Also, if you're fighting a good, let's say, a standard necromancer or something, that fight is hard enough as is. But on top of that, they have Dawnbreaker, they have Blast Bones, all of that goes through roll dodge. So in duels specifically, fighting that is a nightmare as a roll sorc. I don't like doing it. So I prefer having bigger shields instead, because that's a guaranteed damage reduction. Now, one more thing for the skills in that dueling build, it's also important to go with Elemental Drain instead of Fury here, because Fury in a duel does not get used much at all. You'll have a much bigger benefit from Elemental Drain. As ultimate, you can use either Overload or Aetherarch, depending on, you know, again, the PetSorc question, how cheesy you want to make it. And then lastly, I also make a switch in potions for duels, which is, you know, contrary to most of the other builds in this guide. I will switch to immovability potions, which are going to give me, let me get the right one, which are going to hear this, which are going to give me immunity to knockback, so immovability, major prophecy, and Magicka. I'm already getting major sorcery from the crit surge anyway, and immovability is a really nice like effect to have to play around with in duels as well, which is why I find it worth going for. This counts though every time you go with the Swarmbot on the back bar. I forgot to mention it earlier, but every time you go Swarmbot, you'll most likely be running crit surge. In other words, you already have major sorcery. In other words, you don't need to use spell power potions, but it's better to change that spell power buff to an immovability buff. Now, one more extreme thing you can kind of do for duels is, if your sustain is perfectly fine, what with only running one shield and having the elemental terrain, a last thing you can do again is switching out the H-Knock Mundus to the Mage. This will buff up the maximum Magicka even further, at a cost of sustain. It's a bit, again, up to you whether you find it worth making that sacrifice. So that's it for duels. Now a short bit about Battlegrounds. I'm going to be quick about it, to be honest, and that's because I don't have any specific Battleground builds in this guide. I recommend this patch to simply run the same build as open world. So either something that focuses on maximum Magicka, like I just talked about with the duels, or that MagSorc from in the start of the guide, or a build with Ironblood or Lich or whatever you fancy. And the reasons for this is because I've noticed in last patch, where I did try to make a specific dueling battleground build, that either I get into easy battlegrounds that are like low NMR against people that don't really know what they're doing in PvP, and in that case that build kind of misses its function. It's better to just go with the regular Sorc build, because that moves around, you know, against a lot of weaker enemies much easier than a specific like brawler dueling build. And when you do get enemies that are more difficult to fight, the battleground, like pre-mace for example, the battleground will often turn into some kind of brawl fest where everybody will just be, you know, tanking it out in close range in one choke point with each other, trying to burst each other down with dawnbreakers and whatnot. And MagSorc doesn't really have a place in that. Like, it is well, usually not good at brawling at all. It doesn't fit in with all the stamkers and the stand-ins in battlegrounds trying to, you know, melee it out and burst each other down and tank it out what they do to each other. MagSorc doesn't really fit in there. So there too, I think it's better to just go the regular Cyrodiil build and trying to work your way into it like that. Not by brawling, but by simply just DPSing from range, maybe with Overload try to pick some target off, single target some enemy, which works better than trying to brawl. Now, I did make a specific brawling build for MagSorc with like 40k to 45k health with the clan fee here and all that, but I've chosen not to present that in the guide for two reasons. First of all, it's a very niche thing. That build completely ignores everything about usual Sorc playstyle, and as I said before, that brawling is something that in fact all the classes can do better. I do have something available which works, which can brawl. I might make a video with it, but I will not be sharing the build. And the second reason I will be doing that is because honestly I'd rather not have more enemies running around with 45 to 50k health. Like, I hope you understand, but I've had enough of that, of fighting that kind of enemies. So I'm keeping that build to Patreon specific. I hope you understand that. But in any case, so usually for MagSorc, I think you'll also see me doing that on stream. You'll just see me having a regular open world build for Battlegrounds. That is it for the guide for this patch. If I missed anything, just put it in the comments, it's always possible. If you want to check on some details on traits and things like that, check out the website, it's in the description of the video, and there you can find all the additional information about the builds as well as builds for all the other classes. I will be updating that throughout the patch to get you the best that I know for PvP builds in that website out there. Next to that, there's also Patreon. If you want to support me even further than just by watching the video or liking or subscribing, there I also do gameplay reviews and one-on-one calls where I help you personally with whatever might be the problem, be it the build or the gameplay. So I'd be very grateful if you would go check it out as well. But in any case, I thank you all very much for watching. I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you in the next gameplay video. Have a good day.